All right, let's dive in. We're heading back to the very beginning of the American Revolution to pull apart a battle you've probably never heard of. But we're not just looking at old tactics and muskets. Nope, we're digging into its powerful lessons on leadership, on justice, and on the really tough choices people have to make when everything is on the line. And this, right here, this is the big question. It's the question that confronted soldiers on the coast of Virginia way back in 1775. And you know what? It's one that still challenges leaders, and really all of us, in pretty much every field you can imagine. So, picture this. It's been about 6 months since the shot heard round the world up in Massachusetts. But for most folks in Virginia, the war has been, distant news, something happening somewhere else. But right here, on the waterfront of the small port town of Hampton, that is all about to change. The fight is coming home.
So how did this happen, right? How did a conflict that kicked off in New England suddenly explode into a full-on battle right on Virginia's shores? Well, let's take a look at the string of events that basically lit the fuse.
The tension had been building for more than a year. It really started with Britain's coercive acts, which were designed to punish Boston, but ended up putting every other colony on high alert. Then, in April of 1775, Virginia's own royal governor, Lord Dunmore, seized the colonists' gunpowder. And that was seen as a huge provocation, a direct attempt to disarm them. By October, the whole situation was just a powder keg, with British ships raiding coastal farms for supplies and local anger just boiling over. And this was the final spark. After some local militia members captured a few British sailors, Governor Dunmore decided he'd had enough. He ordered Captain Matthew Squire of the HMS Otter to launch a punitive strike on Hampton. And his goal wasn't just to get his men back. It was to make an example of the town, to scare the entire colony into backing down. The tool for this little intimidation campaign? The HMS Otter, a British sloop of war armed with 14 heavy cannons. Now, for a small port town with basically no military fortifications, this was an absolutely terrifying threat. I mean, just think about the destructive power aimed at Hampton. Each one of those cannons could fire an iron shot the size of a grapefruit every couple of minutes. Now imagine those massive iron balls fired over and over again, not at a fortress, but into the homes and businesses of regular people. The intent here was pure terror, designed to completely break their will to resist. The battle itself is fascinating, for sure, but what's really incredible is how we can look at it today. We're going to treat Hampton not just as a historical event, but as a classroom for ethical decision-making, using this really cool tool called the military staff ride. So what in the world is a staff ride? Well, it's an educational practice that goes back centuries. You have military leaders who physically go to a battlefield to walk the ground and analyze the choices commanders made, right there in the heat of battle. It turns history from just a story in a book into a real, tangible lesson in leadership. The modern staff ride was really formalized by this Prussian general, Helmuth von Moltke. And his method is this simple but super powerful three-step process. First, preliminary study. You do your homework. You research the battle's context. Second, field study. You walk the actual ground to analyze the key decision points. And finally, integration. You talk about it and apply those lessons to solve modern problems. And this is where our analysis takes a really unique turn. See, a traditional staff ride focuses on the nuts and bolts, tactics, strategy, terrain. But a spiritual fitness staff ride? It uses that same method to look at the moral and ethical side of a battle. It asks a totally different question. Not just how did they win, but was their victory a just one? So let's do that. Let's apply this ethical framework right now. We're going to put the Battle of Hampton under a moral microscope, using the principles of just war doctrine to really break down the choices made by both sides. Okay, this table really breaks it down. Just war doctrine is basically a set of principles for judging if a war, or an act of war, is moral. So let's see how it applies here. First up, non-combatant immunity, which says you shouldn't target civilians. Well, the British absolutely violated this by firing on homes. Second, proportionality. Was a full naval bombardment a proportional response to a few captured sailors? The doctrine would say probably not. On the flip side, the Virginia militia had a very clear just cause. They were defending their homes and their neighbors. And finally, legitimate authority. Sure, Governor Dunmore had the official authority to give the order, but the doctrine forces us to ask, was the order itself a just one?
And these really complex ethical questions weren't just abstract ideas. They were lived out by the two men leading the fight. So, let's take a look at the opposing commanders.
What we have here are two completely different models of leadership,
On one side, you've got Captain Squire, a career officer who followed his orders to the letter. He put the mission first, way ahead of the morality of bombarding a town. And his actions totally backfired. They just strengthened the colonists' resolve. On the other side, you have Captain Nicholas, a 21-year-old lawyer in his very first command. He chose a path of disciplined defense. He led with courage, sure, but also with incredible restraint. And that inspired his fellow Virginians to stand firm.
So, why does a battle from nearly 250 years ago still matter? Well, because the dilemmas and the virtues that were on display at Hampton, they aren't just stuck on some old battlefield. They apply directly to our professional lives, our personal lives, right now, today. The militia's actions at Hampton give us this powerful checklist for modern integrity. Protecting the innocent, whether that's your family, your community, or your coworkers. Practicing temperance and restraint, especially when you're angry or feeling pressured. Leading by example, so your own moral authority is never in doubt, and standing firm for what you believe in without becoming an aggressor yourself. These are just timeless lessons from that waterfront. And this brings us right back to where we started. The dilemmas from Hampton are not some dusty old relics of history. We face modern versions of them every single day. You know, in your career, when does just following orders from a boss become complicity in something that's wrong? In an argument, how do you know when you've pushed too hard? Ultimately, the Battle of Hampton teaches us that how you win matters just as much as if you win. A victory without integrity, well, it's pretty hollow. So I'll just leave you with this to think about. In the challenges you face every day, in your daily battles, what's your moral high ground?